There is a fire station in Livermore, California, where a light bulb has been burning almost without interruption since 1901. It has outlasted 3 fire chiefs' careers. It has outlasted 2 world wars. It has outlasted the company that made it, the building that first housed it, and every single person who installed it. It is still burning right now as you watch this. Scientists have flown out to examine it. Documentary crews have filmed it. Every single time, the conclusion is the same. There is no trick. It is just a bulb, an ordinary hand-blown carbon filament bulb that, through nothing more exotic than careful engineering and low daily wattage, has simply refused to die. Now, compare that to the one in your house, the one in your kitchen, or the one that just blew out in your bathroom last month. Most modern bulbs are rated for somewhere between 1 and 2,000 hours. That's it. A fraction of a single % of what a light bulb built over a century ago is still doing today for free in a fire station nobody thinks twice about. This is not a story about a lucky light bulb. This is a story about a decision, a real one, made by real executives in a real room on a real date. A decision that didn't just shape the light bulb industry, it built the invisible architecture of almost everything you own. Your phone, your washing machine, your car, the tractor a farmer in Illinois uses to feed people you'll never meet. All of it quietly engineered in one way or another to fail. In July of 2026, that architecture cracked open again. The Federal Trade Commission forced John Deere, one of the largest and most trusted equipment manufacturers on Earth, into a legal settlement after being accused of deliberately locking farmers out of the tools needed to fix their own machines. Software you were never meant to see. Diagnostics you were never allowed to run. A company that built a 100-year fortress around one simple, brutal idea: you don't own what you think you own. To understand how we got here, you have to go back exactly 102 years to a single room in Geneva, to a meeting that most of the world didn't know had happened until decades later. It's Christmas Eve 1924. While most of Europe is closing up shop for the holidays, a small group of executives from the world's largest lighting manufacturers are gathering in Geneva for a very different kind of celebration. General Electric is there. So is Osram, the German lighting giant. So is Philips, the Dutch electronics company that would go on to define consumer technology for the rest of the century. Compagnie des Lampes from France. Tokyo Electric from Japan. Together, these companies control almost the entire global lighting market. And they have a problem. Not a marketing problem, not a supply problem. Something far stranger and far more dangerous. Their products are too good.
By the early 1920s, incandescent bulb technology had matured to the point where a well-made bulb could reliably burn for 2,500 hours, sometimes longer. On paper, that sounds like triumph. Engineering perfected, problem solved. But in the boardrooms of these companies, it was being read as something closer to a 5-alarm fire. If a customer buys a bulb, and that bulb lasts 2,500 hours, and the average household only uses a bulb for a few hours a day, that bulb might last years, maybe 5 years, maybe more, which means that customer isn't coming back to buy another one for a very, very long time. For a company whose entire revenue model depends on repeat purchases, a product that refuses to die isn't an achievement, it's an existential threat. So on that Christmas Eve, in that room in Geneva, these companies didn't gather to celebrate the future of lighting. They gathered to strangle it. What emerged from that meeting was an organization that would later be called, informally, the Phoebus Cartel, named for the Swiss holding company Phoebus SA that was created specifically to run it. Its founding purpose, laid out in cold, procedural language, was almost unthinkable. Standardize the lifespan of a light bulb at exactly 1,000 hours. Not at least 1,000, not up to. Exactly 1,000. A hard ceiling engineered downward from what the technology could already do, purely to protect revenue. This wasn't a vague gentleman's agreement over cigars. It was bureaucratic. It was procedural. It had paperwork. The cartel divided the world into sales territories, assigning quotas to each member company by region, so they weren't even competing with each other anymore. They were cooperating to make sure no company undercut the group by selling a bulb that lasted too long. Each member was required to submit samples of their bulbs to a shared testing laboratory in Switzerland, where technicians would burn them continuously, timing exactly how long they lasted before failure.
And here is the detail that should genuinely disturb you. If a company's bulbs lasted too long, they were fined. Not congratulated for their engineering, fined, punished for excellence. Manufacturers who deviated from the 1,000-hour standard by exceeding it faced financial penalties designed specifically to discourage them from ever doing it again. The core innovation of the entire lighting industry was quietly reprogrammed from build the best possible product to build a product that dies exactly on schedule. To hit this target, engineers didn't need to invent anything new. They needed to uninvent something. They deliberately altered the filament design, using thinner wires and adjusting the composition of the tungsten to create a predictable, engineered point of failure. Bulbs that once could have lasted years were now dying, by design, within about 6 weeks of continuous evening use. And the wild part is that almost no consumer ever noticed because there was no single moment of betrayal to point to. There was no headline, no scandal, no press conference. Just a bulb that burned out a little faster than it used to, in millions of homes, all at once, for decades, until a bulb that lasts about a year simply became what everyone assumed a light bulb was supposed to be. The Phoebus Cartel didn't just shorten a product's life, it rewrote an entire population's expectations of what a product's life was even allowed to be.
The cartel formally operated from 1925 until roughly 1939, when the outbreak of World War II made international coordination between German, French, Dutch, and American companies logistically and politically impossible. But by the time it collapsed, the damage wasn't undone. It was baked in. The 1,000-hour bulb wasn't a wartime aberration that snapped back to normal once the cartel dissolved. It became the default global standard. Here's the thing about engineered scarcity. Once every major manufacturer on Earth has agreed to build to the same lower bar, there's no market pressure pushing anyone back up. The entire competitive landscape simply resets around the artificial ceiling. Consumers didn't know a longer-lasting bulb had ever existed at scale because the evidence, bulbs like the one in Livermore, was treated as flukes, oddities, museum pieces, instead of what it actually was, proof of what had been deliberately taken away. This is the part of the story that almost never makes it into the textbooks because it's not really about light bulbs anymore. Once you understand what happened in Geneva in 1924, you start seeing the same pattern everywhere. The Phoebus Cartel wasn't the birth of planned obsolescence as a fringe idea, it was proof of concept, a working demonstration at global scale that if you could engineer failure into a product and get away with it, you could turn a one-time sale into an infinite, recurring revenue stream. And once that proof of concept existed, it didn't stay contained to light bulbs. It became a business philosophy. Fast forward to the 1930s, and you find the same logic showing up in a very different industry, wrapped in a much more sympathetic story: DuPont and the invention of nylon.
When DuPont unveiled nylon stockings at the 1939 World's Fair, they weren't just introducing a new fabric, they were introducing a genuine engineering marvel. Nylon was strong, shockingly strong. Early nylon stockings were famously durable, virtually run-resistant, capable of surviving wear that would shred silk in minutes. Women who bought them in the early 1940s reported wearing the same pair for months without a single tear. From a pure engineering standpoint, DuPont had built something close to perfect. And almost immediately, that became the problem. A stocking that doesn't run is a stocking you only ever have to buy once. DuPont's own engineers and executives grew increasingly uneasy about a product that was, by their own internal admission, too good for its own commercial good. So over the following years, the formulation was quietly adjusted. The fiber was weakened. Not dramatically, not enough for anyone to point a finger and call it deliberate sabotage, but just enough to shift stockings from a durable good you replace occasionally into a semi-disposable good you replace constantly. The economics of the entire hosiery industry, still built on that adjusted foundation, traced directly back to a company realizing that indestructibility was bad for business. Then there's Detroit. If the light bulb was the quiet proof of concept, the American automobile industry was where planned obsolescence became doctrine, stated out loud in boardrooms as strategy instead of hidden behind a testing lab in Switzerland.
In the 1950s, General Motors design chief Harley Earl became one of the most influential and most candid architects of what came to be called dynamic obsolescence. His stated philosophy wasn't subtle. Design cars not to last forever, but to make last year's model feel outdated the moment a new one hit the showroom floor. Not through mechanical failure this time, but through psychological failure. Engineered dissatisfaction. New fins, new chrome, new colors every single year, whether or not the underlying engineering had meaningfully changed at all. The goal wasn't to make a car break down. The goal was to make you feel embarrassed to still be driving it. Earl himself was remarkably blunt about the intent behind this strategy, framing the entire design philosophy around manufacturing desire for the new at the direct expense of satisfaction with what you already had. This is the moment planned obsolescence splits into two distinct weapons, both of which are still being used against you right now. The first is what economists call physical obsolescence, the Phoebus Cartel model. Build the object itself to fail, on a schedule, by design. The second is perceived obsolescence, the Harley Earl model. Leave the object mostly intact, but make the owner feel that it's outdated, embarrassing, behind the times, so they replace it anyway out of psychology rather than necessity. And once you have language for both of those weapons, you cannot unsee them anywhere in the modern economy. Look at your smartphone. The lithium-ion battery inside it is a textbook case of physical obsolescence with a twist the Phoebus engineers would have admired. It isn't even hidden behind a testing lab anymore. It's a known, published, physically unavoidable characteristic of the chemistry itself. Lithium-ion batteries degrade through repeated charge cycles as an inherent property of how they store energy. But manufacturers have made deliberate design decisions that accelerate and compound that natural degradation. Batteries sealed inside chassis with proprietary adhesives instead of screws, specifically to make a 5-minute repair into an hour-long ordeal, requiring specialized tools most consumers don't have. Software updates that, whether through negligence or design, coincide suspiciously with a slowdown in device performance right around the time a new model launches. Multiple electronics manufacturers have faced lawsuits and regulatory scrutiny over performance throttling tied to battery age. And layered right on top of that hardware reality is the Harley Earl playbook, running at a pace even Detroit in the 1950s never dared attempt. An entirely new phone, marketed as essential, arriving in your feed every single year, whether or not the one already in your pocket has failed at all.
This is where the John Deere case slots in, not as a footnote, but as the modern industrial-scale continuation of exactly the same story. For years, farmers who owned John Deere tractors and combines, machines that can cost $500,000 or more, found themselves locked out of the software required to diagnose and repair their own equipment.
A worn sensor, a faulty part, even a simple recalibration after a repair could trigger a digital lockout that only an authorized Deere dealer's software could clear. Farmers weren't just being asked to buy parts, they were being forced to wait, sometimes for days, during the exact planting or harvest windows when every single hour matters, for an authorized technician to arrive and unlock a machine they had already paid for in full. The machine was legally theirs. Functionally, it wasn't. In July of 2026, the Federal Trade Commission, alongside attorneys general from 5 states, finally forced a reckoning. The settlement requires Deere, for the next decade, under direct federal oversight, to give farmers and independent repair shops the same repair resources, the same diagnostic software, the same fault code access, the same ability to reprogram components that it had always reserved exclusively for its own authorized dealer network. It follows a separate $99 million class action settlement earlier the same year. 2 settlements in a single year against a single company, both built around the same accusation that access to repair had been deliberately, systematically restricted, not because it was technically necessary, but because restricting it was profitable.
Read that sentence again. Then go back to that room in Geneva in 1924. The mechanism has evolved. Light bulbs don't need software locks, but tractors do. But the underlying logic hasn't moved an inch in over 100 years. Make the failure point invisible. Make the fix expensive, slow, or impossible without your permission. Convert something the customer believes they own outright into something they are, in practice, perpetually renting from you. One repair, one part, one software unlock at a time. And this is where the story stops being about individual products entirely and becomes something closer to a structural trap built into the operating logic of the modern economy itself. Modern industrial economies are, almost without exception, built on the assumption of continuous growth, quarterly earnings that must exceed the previous quarter, annual revenue that must exceed the previous year, shareholder expectations that treat flat as a failure state, even when a company is, by any reasonable measure, already enormously profitable. That growth has to come from somewhere, and the 2 cleanest, most reliable sources are sell to new customers or sell more often to the customers you already have. The first source, new customers, is fundamentally, mathematically finite. Every market eventually saturates. Eventually, more or less, everyone who wants a light bulb or a phone or a tractor already has one. When that happens, a company built on perpetual growth has exactly one lever to pull. Shorten the replacement cycle of what people already own. Make the thing they have die sooner, feel obsolete sooner, or become impossible to fix without buying something new. Strip away the marketing language, and it's a system that requires waste as an input, not an unfortunate side effect of production, but a deliberate structural precondition for the entire economic model to keep functioning at all.
That runs headlong into a problem no amount of clever engineering or software licensing can ever actually solve. The Earth itself is not infinite. The rare earth metals in your phone's battery, the lithium, the copper, the steel in a John Deere tractor, these are finite, extracted, geologically limited resources sitting inside a global economic system that requires them to be thrown away and replaced on an accelerating schedule forever, just so that system can keep registering as healthy on a quarterly earnings report. This is the trap, not a conspiracy in the cartoonish sense. Nobody needs a secret Geneva meeting anymore to make it happen, though as we've just seen, sometimes it still happens exactly that way, right out in the open, in a courtroom filing. It's a trap built into the architecture of how growth-based economies are measured, rewarded, and sustained. A system that treats a bulb burning since 1901 not as an engineering triumph to be replicated, but as a threat to be quietly buried for 100 years. The right to repair movement now gaining momentum across the world, the EU's right to repair directive taking effect at the end of this month, new state laws expanding across America, the John Deere settlement itself represents the first serious institutional pushback against this logic in generations. Not a rejection of technology, not a rejection of profit, a rejection of the specific, century-old idea that a company should be allowed to sell you something and then, legally, prevent you from ever truly owning it. The bulb in that fire station in Livermore is still burning right now. It has been burning through every single one of these settlements, every lawsuit, every locked-out farmer, every phone battery that degraded exactly on schedule, every stocking that ran a little faster than it should have. It doesn't know it's a symbol, it's just doing what a well-made object left alone is capable of doing, lasting. The only real question left is how much longer the rest of us will be told that it can't.